Hello, thank you for listening to 3 Legacies Recovery Recordings. If you enjoy our program, please be sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to share with a friend. We're also self-supporting, so feel free to contribute to the channel through Venmo at Recovery Recordings 615. Please note that the views expressed on this podcast are solely our individual views and do not represent any official stance of any 12-step program. We are not affiliated with any specific recovery organization, and this content should not be considered as professional advice for alcoholism or addiction.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to 3 Legacies Recovery Recordings Podcast. I'm your host, Paul. Today is Tuesday, September 16th, 2025, and this is episode 67. You can reach us at Recovery Recordings 615 at yahoo.com, and that's plural, Recovery Recordings 615. You can also find us, we have a private Facebook page. It's 3 Legacies Recovery Recordings Podcast. You can also find us on Audible, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Podomatic, several other major platforms. Super excited about tonight's guest. I think we briefly ran into each other about a year ago, actually a little over a year ago, at a conference here in Nashville. And we have Rory M. from Las Vegas, Nevada. How you doing, buddy?
I'm doing well, man. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, welcome, man. Welcome. It was the Music City Roundup is where we met last year. Well,
that's right. That's right. Yeah, 4th of July.
Yeah. And they moved it this year because the international, they moved it this year. So yeah, how's things in Las Vegas?
Things are good, man. I'm on the road right now. I'm in Washington D.C. coming to you from my hotel room. But no, things are good, humming along, and just doing what we do.
Nice. On a business trip?
I am, yeah. I travel, I don't know, about 80 days a year or so. So typically every other week I'm on the road somewhere.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, and I guess we'll start off by just saying, well, let me bring this up. So your sobriety date is June 5th, 2010. You just celebrated 15 years of sobriety. Congratulations.
I did. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Yeah. I guess let's start by just getting to know you a little bit. You know, how you was 18 years old when you got sober.
I was 18 years old when I got sober, and if you told me at 18 years old I'd still be here 15 years later, I probably would have run out the door and drank. When I got to Alcoholics Anonymous, it was like, I need to figure out a way to let me move back in the house because I've got nowhere to go. And, I see the light, Mom. I'm alcoholic. I'm going to go to AA, and I promise this is the last time. And when I got here, I figured if I could stay sober that summer, if I could stay sober till the fall, then I could get everything together again. Nice. And 15 years later, here we are.
Well, I get that. I completely get that. Well, let's talk about, so when you, where were you at when you first got sober? What area?
So I was in the suburbs of Baltimore, Maryland. My first home group was in Bowie, Maryland, and we kind of, that group was just one meeting there on Bowie on Friday nights, but we kind of traveled as a pack and went to a bunch of meetings around Anne Arundel County and Baltimore County, Baltimore City, and southern Pennsylvania. So we were Wednesday night was in Pasadena, and Tuesday night was in Glen Burnie, Thursday night was in Baltimore City, Saturday nights we'd go up to Dallastown, Pennsylvania. So that kind of, southern Pennsylvania, Maryland area is where I got sober.
Yeah, so you're probably familiar with the D.C. area where you're at right now, huh?
Yeah, very, very, very much so. Typically when I'm here on business, I'm kind of in the city of DC, but I'm here a lot. So I've a lot of AA contacts, a lot of AA friends here, and always typically hit a meeting or two wherever I am on the road, but specifically here.
Nice. And then, you had mentioned before Texas, so you spent a lot of time in Texas. What'd that look like? How'd you get there?
Yeah, so I have bounced back and forth between Las Vegas and Texas multiple times. I moved to Texas the first time at about 6 years sober for a job, and I was there for a few months, and I found out I'd be having a baby in Las Vegas, and then ended up moving back to Las Vegas after living in Texas a little less than a year. I ended up getting sole custody of my son and was in Las Vegas for the next few years. Started a business there in Las Vegas, and then and then moved to Austin, Texas about 5 years ago. And, with the goal of, we opened an office for the business in Austin, and the goal of kind of expanding that business and everything. And unfortunately, that we weren't super successful in that. And ultimately, I was just traveling a lot more, flying back to our main office in Las Vegas and everything like that. So we ended up closing our Austin office, and I moved back to Las Vegas full time January of this year.
Nice. Wow, busy man, huh? That's cool.
Well, Clancy used to say depression has a hard time hitting a moving target. So,
very good, man. I love that. It's so true, right? I used to love how he'd talk about pockets of enthusiasm, right? It's so big, right? And I think that's, luckily over the years, I've always managed to like run into people like those little pockets of enthusiasm that just kind of took me. I just rode that and just. It led into, that's what, when I first got sober, luckily I'd been around people that were, doing the deal, making things happen, and luckily just always had mentors like that throughout my recovery, right?
Yeah. My buddy Chad P. up in New Jersey likes to say, when you move to a new town and go to a meeting and ask somebody, where are the people who take this thing a little too seriously? Like, where are the people who just kind of annoy all the other people with how seriously they take this thing, then go over there?
Yeah. And Charlie P. used to always say, he said, show up at the convention or the conference early and see who's setting up the chairs. He's like, they're the ones that'll be there next year.
Yeah, that's right. That's exactly right.
So it's so big. Well, that's it's funny because when we first spoke, when I had hit you up on Facebook, I think originally it was, and I remembered running into you at the Music City Roundup. When I first asked, like, what are we going to do this on? You'd mentioned traditions, and at that time, it seemed like a great idea. I'm all for traditions. And then I realized, like, here it is months later, and I've already done so much tradition stuff. And we were like, let's do, you'd mentioned, let's do 6 and 7, which is always great. And it's funny, I was thinking earlier, 6 and 7 are really tied into the traditions in so many different ways, right? If you really look at, like, what it's really about, like, putting my own personal agenda aside or my own ambitions aside for what's the best for the whole in the traditions. And if you look at, it's 6 and 7, right? It's like, I'm finally finding out some stuff about myself and learning how to put, God's ambitions above my own, right?
Well, I think, I'm a big believer in I'm a believer so much as my experience is that, you name your podcast as Three Legacies, right? And I think, at various times in my sobriety, I've been all in on one legacy or another, right? Either I'm the guy with, sponsoring half the detox, but I don't know what a nightly review is, or I'm the guy who will argue with you exactly about what the questions in the 11th step are, but I'm not living these principles in my life. And what I've found is that I have to be firmly rooted in a community of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I have to feel comfortable in a community of Alcoholics Anonymous, at least comfortable enough that I can be there and be transparent to make any headway on any of these character defects, to access enough of this power of God, right, to have some of these defects subsided or removed from me. And I'm only capable of doing that with the traditions.
Nice. I love that. I love how you just talked about community. It's something I've shared over the last few months is if you really look at the opposite of addiction or alcoholism, it's community, right? It's like, where are we at in the community? Right, that's so huge. And luckily, I'll be honest with you. Luckily, like when I first got sober, we wasn't big book guys, but the lineage I came from in the beginning was huge on like, what are you doing? Like, how many guys are you working with? How many guys are you sponsoring? How many guys are you just making a point to just get out of your way and just seeing what you could do to brighten someone's day up, be of service in some way, right? And so I was really established in the community side of things. I love how you touched on that. How about yourself?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's kind of similarly. Like, I mean, I never went line by line through the book with my first sponsor, and I don't take the guys I sponsor line by line through the book. We'll use the book as kind of, Clancy used to call it a cookbook, right? Like, we'll go to the book for the directions, but we at least in the guys I'm sponsoring, what we're trying to achieve is an awakening as quickly as possible. What we're trying to achieve is what it talks about on pages 14 and 15, where it says that that we had to perfect and enlarge our spiritual condition through work and self-sacrifice for others. And I think that's ultimately what the awakening is. The awakening is that my own self-centeredness, no matter how good my motives are, will lead to my own destruction. And the only antidote for that self-centeredness is inconvenient service to others. And I can study all the literature I want, and I can do all the stuff I want, but ultimately the only thing that's capable of turning down the volume in my own head, this constant thought of myself, is if I can find myself thinking about you. And Chamberlain, right? Chamberlain used to say that there is one problem that contains all problems, and that problem is the conscious or unconscious separation from my fellows and therefore from God, right? I cannot be separated. I cannot be separated from my fellows and close to God. My ego will convince me I can. My ego will convince me everybody at the home group's doing it wrong, and I'm the guy who understands God, right? About 3-4 times a year, I will in my truck by myself decide I'm quitting my home group and inform my sponsor. Well, about once a year I work up the courage to inform my sponsor, and he informs me that I'm stupid, and he expects me to see me at the home group next week.
Yeah. Wow, I get it. Yeah, that's huge. I love you just touched on that. It's about the spiritual way. I love how you really touched on the connection we have with other people. That's so huge. Really, what's the book really pointing at, right? It's having the spiritual awakening through the process. We've tapped into some kind of power, and I also like how important it is to touch on how important it is to what does that look like? Like, what are we really aiming towards this? Because I don't really understand, and it wasn't until I went through I had a decent 4th step experience and a 5th step experience and found out like how, I love that one line in 6. It says, are we now ready to let God remove all these things which we have admitted are objectionable, right? I went through like a big portion of my recovery where I was doing a lot of stuff that I probably should have found objectionable, but I hadn't went through, an inventory process and found out. And I was pretty sick because, for a solid, at least 2 or 3, probably at least 2 years, right? Probably maybe close to 3. Where I finally did an inventory and was like, holy crap, I'm causing a lot. This is causing a lot of problems, right?
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, but I would take it one step further than that. What I would say is that that's a good piece of business. But I know I've had the experience, and you might have had the experience of doing inventory over and over again and finding the same things are objectionable over and over again, and you're still doing them. Right in the book, it says we had moral and philosophical convictions galore, but we couldn't live up to them even if we would have liked to. It doesn't say, when we were drinking, right? Yeah. My experience in my sobriety is that I've had stuff I've found in inventory objectionable again and again and again, and it's only when the pain of continuing to do that is so great that I'm willing to take the action necessary to access this power to not do it, right? In the 12th step, when it talks about having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, we try to carry this message and practice these principles in all our affairs. For years, for like the first at least decade of my sobriety, I thought it was like Bill was like running out of room and he didn't want to go on to a 13th step, so he kind of jammed 2 together, But what I've come to find is that I am only capable of practicing these principles in my affairs if the primary purpose in my life is carrying the message, because without that I am so self-centered, and that self-centeredness has to go somewhere, and it'll come out in one of a million character defects. It'll come out in porn or food or anger or spending money or whatever the case may be.
Yeah, I love that. I love how, and it goes into everything you just touched on. Makes me think of, if you look at the 7th step prayer, right, it says it removes anything that stands in the way of my usefulness to you and my fellows, right? Which is huge, which is really what we're really aiming at in this whole thing, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, look, we go through the book, right? In the 3rd step prayer, it says to bear witness to those I would help. In the 9th step, it says, fit ourselves to be a maximum service to God and the people about us, right? And I think that sometimes, and I know I did, I think sometimes we act like it's like this idea that we're going to do the steps and we're going to have this amazing experience and we're going to be so grateful for it that we're just going to want to charge out the door and go help everybody, right? And I don't, the longer I've stayed sober, I don't think that's what it is, right? I think it's that I am only capable of accessing this grace if I have turn the knob a little bit from this guy who is a self-centered, self-consumed narcissist to someone who is at least a decent percentage of the time other-centered, whether I want to be or not, right?
Yeah.
And
Nice. Yeah. Absolutely.
what was I going to say? Whatever the next thing I was going to say was going to be totally brilliant, Paul. Everyone was
No, I get it. I did the same thing.
I forgot it now.
Yeah, I did the same thing about 3 minutes ago. Yeah. All right. So I'm gonna, like I shared with you earlier, as much as I'm not a big fan of reading stuff necessarily. I want to read a couple things. That really, when I think of 6, this right here, and we've already touched on a lot of this stuff, but I'm going to read this. Okay, so this is in the 12 and 12 on page 65. This is part of step 6 in 12 and 12. It says, since most of us are born with an abundance of natural desires, it isn't strange that we often let these far exceed their intended purpose. Right? It says, when they drive us blindly, or we willfully demand that they supply us with more satisfaction and pleasures than are possibly due us, that is the point which we depart from the degree of perfection that God wishes for us here on earth. That is the measure of our character defects, or our sins, if you wish. Right? Yeah, I think that I wanted to touch on that briefly. And then I like adding this one to it as well, okay, because this kind of sums it up too. And this is in step 7 in the 12 and 12. This is on page 72. It starts on 73, bottom of 71, and then goes into 72. It says, true, most of us thought that good character was desirable. And by the way, for the listeners, we're calling this episode, it's step 6 and 7, character or comfort, and this is where I get it from. It says, true, most of us thought that good character was desirable. But obviously good character was something one needed to get on with the business of being self-satisfied. With a proper display of honesty and morality, we stand a better chance of getting what we really wanted. But whenever we had to choose between character and comfort, the character building was lost in the dust of our chase after what we thought was happiness. Seldom did we look at character building as something desirable in itself, something we would like to strive for, whether our instinctual needs were met or not. We never thought of making honesty, tolerance, and true love of man and God the daily basis of our living. I love that line right there. Right? That's huge. It says, this lack of anchorage to any permanent values, this blindness to our true purpose of our lives, produced another bad result. For just so long as we were convinced that we could live exclusively by our own individual strength and intelligence, for just so long was a working faith in a higher power impossible. This was true even when we believed that God existed. We could actually have earnest religious beliefs which remained barren because we were still trying to play God ourselves. As long as we placed self-reliance first, the genuine reliance upon a higher power was out of the question. That basic ingredient of all humility, a desire to seek and do God's will, was missing. I love those right? Yeah, what does that really make you think of? What comes to mind when you hear that?
So when we look at the piece in the 6th step, right, it makes me think of the line in chapter 5 where it says he's a victim of the delusion that he can wrest satisfaction and happiness out of this world if only he manages well, right? It's, all of us want to make enough money to pay our bills and have a little in the savings account, and all of us want to, be partnered up in a, and have our natural desires for procreation and sex and all of those things met, right? But my mind will pervert these, and all of those things feel good. You work hard, you get a paycheck, you get your bills paid, put a little in the savings account. That's a good feeling, right? But my mind, which is my constant enemy, my ego, which is my constant enemy, will take this immediately to, well, if that much in the savings account made you feel good, a little more in the savings account's really going to do the deal, right? And I come back to, it's funny because that part you read in the 7th step, right? Like I battle with that part so much until you get to the very end where it talks about humility, right? Because in 15 years of sobriety, I have never once gotten to the, and God, it always used to annoy the crap out of me when I was, new in A, it still does sometimes. When I go into a meeting and there's someone who shares about how they just, they knew they were home the minute they got to AA because they always wanted to find a place where they could serve other people, and they can do that in AA. And I wanted to commit crimes and get away away with it,
Yeah.
but I was a terrible little suburban gangster, and my mother had had enough of it, right? Like, there was no part of me that came here looking for an altruistic movement, right?
Amen.
I'm only driven toward these actions of character over comfort because the alternate is self-destruction, right?
Yeah.
The alternate is drinking again.
Yeah.
If I had the ability to stay sober on my own power and my own will, right, then I would do it, right? Ultimately, it's not a question of character or comfort, like I'm making it from some esoteric position of like, well, would I rather be a person of character or comfort?
Yeah.
Comfort, obviously, but the problem is that self-centeredness is like quicksand, right? It is this, no matter how much I get of it, it demands more, and eventually the pain of being so self-consumed the only thing that can medicate that is a drink, right?
Yeah.
And the humility piece that it talks about at the end is there is nothing that can alleviate me of that condition other than God, right? And 15 years later, and this is, I in 3 years from now, I might call you and be like, hey, delete that episode because this was idiotic. But I've been thinking about this a lot lately. I don't think 15 years into sobriety, I'm any less self-centered than I was 15 days into sobriety, right? Because if the solution for self-centeredness is God, then I don't think that God loves me more today than he did 15 years ago. I just think I'm far more humble meaning surrendered, right? I'm far more humiliated by the effects of my own self-centeredness, and I'm far more surrendered to this process that allows me to be cleverly disguised as a functioning member of society, to live like a guy who isn't completely all the time driven by their own desires and wills and so on and so forth.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, it's today we have some obviously, quite a bit more awareness that it's going on. We've went through the process and we've started finding these things objectionable, and now it's like, okay, now I have a design for living. I'm going to lean into something, that's effective, right? I mean, if you look at it, really, at the end of the day, the thing about the 15-day sober guy is that he don't realize, he has no evidence that there's a power. I didn't. At 15 days, right. I didn't believe there was a power that was available to me right now that I could lean into or tap into.
Well, and what I would...
Can you hear me? You're cutting out right there. Go ahead. Can you hear me? Hello? Rory. All right, buddy, we're back.
Yeah. So the 15-day guy, like, not only does he in his own life of this power yet, but also he doesn't have evidence of kind of the second half of step one yet, right? Like, most of us have two surrenders. We have the surrender to, okay, we can't drink, we can't take things that change how we feel because we can't stop and it ruins our lives. But then typically at some point in the sobriety, I come to the realization that I can't manage my life sober either, right? I can't, the fact that once I start drinking and I can't stop, like it says on page 23, right, is not my main problem. My main problem is that without alcohol, I am so completely self-consumed, it'll ruin my life. And the 15-day guy probably doesn't know that yet.
Yeah, absolutely. If he does, he's freaking amazing. Yeah. It's funny because you get to that point. That's it. Me and Judy. There's a lady named Judy L. that's been doing a tradition series with us, and we're talking about how, like, having a seventh step awareness is huge. Like, if you're actually going to even want to apply the principles and the traditions to your life, like, if you don't understand, like, that self is showing up all over the place, and that's an issue. And going back to what you're talking about with the second part of the first step, right, is I'm under bad management, right? You don't realize that that's causing a bunch of problems in your life yet, right?
Right. No, at 15 days sober, you think I screwed up my life drinking, and once I've not been drinking for a while, this will get straight, right? And then normally you have some type of a collapse around, year 5, and then maybe another one at year 10, and you just continually face the fact that, you're a self-centered idiot, right? I mean, that's as highfalutin as I can put it.
Yeah, no, that's huge. Right? I love that. I love how you said that. It was 5 for me. It was probably around 5, maybe 4, and then 5. It carried into 5. Yeah.
Right.
Nice, man. So let's what else you want to share? Let's talk about. Well, let me go into this. It seems as if 7 is really, 7 is really about relationship with us and God, really, if you think about it. Like, that's what keeps showing up for me, where I've been at over the last 6 months is like, because it's going to continue to show up, right? You're going to continue to see, like what you've said, you're going to see how the self-centeredness is going to continue over and over and over, and it ain't going anywhere, obviously, right? So, like, in 7, you start seeing how, that's where you really start forming a relationship with God, because you realize without that, you're going to turn the whole thing into, it's just going to be horrible, right? I mean, it's continuously problem after problem after problem. But it seems like that step right there, one of the purposes of it is, that we're turning towards God, turning towards God, turning towards God, and that's where our relationship with Him really kind of takes off. Does that make sense?
Well, for sure, and I think what you're the way I've always looked at it is this, right? The 6th step is like when the newcomer stands up in the meeting and he gets his whatever you call it, a newcomer chip or desire chip or whatever you call it in your area, right? In that moment, he's making a commitment that I don't want to drink again, right? Yeah. And that's a wonderful display, and that's a wonderful gesture. But the reality is if all he ever does is get that, is get that desire chip, we both know he's not going to stay sober, right? Yeah. The 7th step is where now the newcomer goes out and he does all the actions to stay sober. He gets the sponsor, he writes the inventory, he gets the home group, so on and so forth, right? And similarly with the 7th step, right? The sixth step is almost analogous to the 2nd step, right? Because all of my character defects have a purpose. I'm not in 15 years of sobriety, I've sponsored a ton of guys, and I have never once sponsored a guy who's come into my office or come in the room and said, Rory, I want to, break my mother's heart. I want to make my wife leave me. I want to make the boss fire me. I want my children to hate me, right? But inevitably, a lot of us end up there. And many of us, I've been engaged 4 times in the last 6 years. A lot of us end up there sober, right? Yeah. And so the 6th step is analogous to the 2nd step, right? Where the 2nd step is I'm saying I am willing to believe these actions that I am willing to take these actions that I don't believe in. Right, I'm willing to believe that they might work enough that I will take these actions. And the 6th step is similar to that, where it's where I'm saying I am willing to let go of this character defect, as terrified as I may be of losing whatever it is doing for me, right? Of losing the comfort that it's giving me, of losing the power it's giving me, of losing the money it's giving me, or whatever the thing is, right? And the 7th step is where I take the actions to have access to this power, so I don't have to act on the character defect again. Yeah. I saw a guy do this one time, and I've stolen it 5 million times, right? He was giving a talk on this step, and he held up an empty cup, and he said, how do we take the oxygen out of this cup? And people kind of postulized some theories, and they were like, well, we could hook it up to a space vacuum, and we could suck the oxygen out of it without breaking the integrity, all this stuff. And he says, well, I got a much simpler answer, and he takes a bottle of water and he pours some water in the cup, right? And the water displaces the oxygen. Right. The 7th step is the process of displacing my selfish and self-centeredness that is driving me to these character defects with other-centered, God-centered actions, so I don't have to continue the character defect. Right. Wow. And I'll give you a very real-world example of that. The single biggest I've had a lot of defects that have kicked my ass in sobriety. I was stealing at 2 years sober, but probably biggest character defect that has kicked my ass in sobriety has been sex, affairs, children out of wedlock, all pornography, all that kind of stuff. And I had a surrender around that issue at about 11 years, right? And after all kinds of stuff, after all kinds of consequences from that, but just having the surrender around that issue and doing an honest to God, I went out on Lake Brownwood in Texas and did the most honest 6-step prayer I've ever done and said, God, I don't care if I ever have sex again. I don't want to be like this anymore. I don't want to live this way anymore, right? And it was probably to date the most honest 6-step prayer I've ever said, right? We asked for the willingness. Yeah. And then, I don't know, fast forward the tape a year or two, and I'm headed up to Dallas on a business trip, and the compulsion to act out on that character defect is on on Rice, and I call my sponsor and I'm talking to him about it, and I said, I'm scared, man. I'm going up to Dallas. I'm going to be in a hotel for a couple of days, and I got this compulsion act on this defect. And he said, and he didn't tell me to go read something or write an inventory. He said, you have to do whatever it takes to not act on that defect tonight. If it means that you have to go sit at the 24-hour club and wait for new guys to come so you can help somebody else. And ultimately, that's what I did. I was at the 24-hour club up there till probably 12:30, something like that, because I had to make a conscious choice to displace that selfish and self-centeredness, to turn toward the creator rather than turn towards selfishness. And the seventh said, very fortunately, very rarely do our character defects, the obsession around them, manifest in those extremes. But that was the perfect example of I have to make a decision to turn toward the Father of Light, or I have to make a decision to turn toward myself.
Yeah, that's huge. I love how you said that. It wasn't until just several years ago where I realized that there was even a decision in some of them moments, right? It's like, am I turning towards self or towards me and my sponsor were having a conversation probably about 3 years ago, and 2 or 3 years ago, and he was like, yeah, but you're either turning towards God or turning towards self. And I was like, I didn't have an option at that. Like there was times in my, at that 4 or 5 years sober, where there was times where there was not a choice. I didn't think, right? It was way bigger than me, and I had to get into prayer, and and sharing it with another person. Where there was times where I just wasn't aware that was an option, right?
Yep. Well, I am so self-consumed that, like, to everyone else it's an option, but to me it's I tell you a story. I was living in Indiana. I think I was 4 years sober, and I'd just given this barn burner AA talk. I mean, oh my God, would have brought a tear to your eye AA talk, right? And I leave that AA talk, and I go meet up with this girl that I had no business, and I knew on the way to her house, I got no business doing this. This is shameful. A sober man in Alcoholics Anonymous shouldn't be behaving this way, right? Yeah. And I go and do what I'm gonna do, and then the morning after, I'm driving home, and I call my sponsor, and his name was Frank at the time, and Frank, I can't, I want to stop. I don't want to be this way anymore. And he goes, bullshit. You want to stop? Bullshit. Yeah. And I said, what do you mean? He said, did your phone not work when you were on the way to her house? Right? Yeah. Like, you could have called me. We could have gotten a cheeseburger. You could have come over, hung out. We could have gone down to the halfway house, see if anybody down there needed help. Like, so I'm so consumed in this, Pavlovian relationship I have with my character defects, right? I'm insecure. I need comfort. I need, whatever it is that I'm getting from that character defect, that it's just such an automatic mechanism for me to seek that out. That I can't even see, like, the vast amount of God just beyond that periphery.
Yeah. I love that. I really like how you just touched on that. You got to replace it. How do you get rid of the oxygen in the cup? I love that. It's a great analogy. So what about, so when you're working, say you have a sponsee, and this may look different, obviously, if it's somebody that's brand new versus, 10 years sober. But like when you get to the step 6 and 7, when you're in the step work, what does that look like? What is it when you're carrying it? Let's just say, and if it is different with the guy 1 year sober, or 10 days sober versus, or not 10 days, but let's say 2 or 3 months sober versus 10 years, what does that look like?
Yeah, so it's a great question. So especially for a newer guy, I'm gonna ask them to make a list of. I'm gonna ask them a couple of questions, right? I'm gonna ask them to make a list of their character defects. Mm-hmm. And in this circumstance, you have one of two guys. You either have the guy who, like, swears he has no character defects, and his only character defect is sometimes he helps too much,
Yeah.
And and that, or you have the guy who has 300 character defects and thinks that he's going to get rid of his character defects by filling up a spiral notebook, right?
Yeah.
and then with each character defect, I'll have them answer a couple simple questions, right? What is the defect? Is it objectionable to you? Right? Because we're not the arbiter of anybody's conduct here. I'm not in the place to say something is wrong or bad or otherwise if it's not objectionable to you. Now, when the consequences of that defect come back around, I'm going to be like, remember when we talked about this and this didn't seem to be a problem for you? Yeah. Right? I'm going to bring that up, but it's not my place to tell a guy how he should be living. Yeah. Right? And then the last question, the most important one, is, do I have any power over it? Meaning, have I have I tried my best to have this removed and not been able to do it, right? If I, if I have power over this defect, that I really don't need God's help in this deal. So we're going to look for a couple of defects that are objectionable and the guy has really tried to not act on and finds himself coming up short again and again and again.
Yeah.
And then I'm going to pick 3, right? Like, especially if you're 90 days sober, like, let's not, we're not even going to worry about, like, my egoism. We're going to worry about, like, I cuss out my boss, right? Or whatever. So we're going to look at that one, and then I'm going to ask them to do something really simple. I'm going to ask them to bring it into their morning meditation, and then I'm going to ask them to be accountable. Text me at the end of every day and be accountable about that specific character defect. Mm-hmm. And then we're just going to keep going through the program, right? Let's get on our amends. Let's get on our sponsees, so on and so forth. Because if I'm doing the rest of the work, that is how I displace the oxygen from the cup. Right. It's not, Sheldon. I think you've had him on. I was actually given a 6 and 7 step talk at his group a couple of months ago, and it's one of those deals where you share for a half hour and then some other people share and Sheldon shared something I thought was really good. He said, people say that, the 6 and 7 step must be not that important because Bill only wrote 2 paragraphs on them. And he said, Bill wrote a whole book about 6 and 7. He just summed it up in 2 paragraphs. So 6 and 7 are no different than my drinking is no different than any of my other character defects, right? My drinking might be the largest symptom of my selfishness and self-centeredness, but the treatment for my drinking, the treatment for the rest of my character defects is no different than the treatment from my drinking. I'm going to take the action to remove the calamity, pomp, and worship of other things that obstructs my relationship with God.
Yeah. You still there?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. No, that's absolutely wonderful. Yeah. And actually, Sheldon is going. He hadn't been on the show yet. We got him booked for November 5th, and we're actually going to do our episode on 6 and 7. So I'm looking forward to that. But yeah, I love that.
He can clean up everything I missed. So there you go.
I love that, man. How you're right though. I mean, you just keep doing the work, and also I love how you pretty much bringing awareness to it. Are we finding this objectionable? Because like I mentioned earlier, there was a lot of stuff, and still I'm curious, often current, what's not objectionable in my life yet, right? And
absolutely. I mean, and that's where there's nothing worse than going to a 6 and 7 step meeting and hearing people talk about their character defects in the past tense, right? Like they used to have character defects, right? Like that's the work here. The work here is, and hopefully I have a sponsor who is not in any way impressed with me, and depending on the day, I'm either happy or sad to report that my sponsor is not, right? Hopefully I have a sponsor who isn't impressed with me at all and has no problem helping me see what these defects that are still running my life are.
Yeah, I love that. That's good. Yeah. Nice, man. Nice. And that looks the same. Well, I guess, obviously the newer guy's not really going to see, maybe you will find, obviously, if some of it might be blindingly, obviously, to him that this should be objectionable or is objectionable versus the guy that's 10 years sober, so that process still looks the same for the two. Is that what you're saying?
Well, normally, if a guy's coming to me with 5 years sober, right? Like he's got 5 years, and maybe he hasn't had a sponsor in a little while, or he's jumping sponsors or something like that. If he's coming to me at 5 years sober, 10 years sober, something like that, he's got a pretty good idea of he's 99% of the time not coming to me because life is going great and wonderful, and he just figured he should switch it up, right? Mm-hmm. He's coming to me because there's something that's burning his life to the ground, right? Maybe it's a marriage that's falling apart, maybe it's some big financial problems, whatever it is. But so the first conversation we have, we're going to get a pretty good look at what's going on in his life and the defects that might be driving that.
Yeah. Mine was resentment. At 5 years sober, man, I'd been sitting on resentments and just piling up for at that point for about 2 or 3 years, right? And I had no solution for it, and I remember kept telling myself, like, what is going on? What is this? And it was funny because I heard Charlie P and Katie P talking about the book, and they were talking about, they would say stuff that I was like, what are they talking about? Like, they keep talking about this self, how self shows up, and I ended up going through, getting a big book guy at that time and went through the book, and it was, and things just started changing. I remember when I finally did an inventory where I was like, holy crap, like, and I've never once considered the other person's feelings ever in my life. You know, it would be times where, like Charlie would always talk about it, and it was my experience was, he'd say, only whenever, like, what I did, maybe if I caused some major harms in the day, and the only reason I was even considering someone else's feelings is because I felt bad about it, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and we miss this piece all the time, right? It says resentment is the number one offender, but if we look one line, and we always, I think, often we'll take that out of context, and it'll be like, oh, I drink over resentments, and like, I mean, okay, maybe you do, but plenty of people drink when they're happy also.
Yeah.
It's not, I don't think that's what it's talking about. When it says resentment is the number one offender, if you look one line above that in the book, we consider the common manifestations of self, right?
Yeah.
Resentment is the number one way. When you've pissed me off, it's very clear that there's something that, it obviously, without fail, affects me in some way. I've never had a resentment against someone or something that doesn't affect me in any way, right? I've got resentments against the IRS. I don't have resentments against the tax service of France because I'm not a citizen of France. I don't pay them no taxes.
Yeah. And that's it. It's like you get to a point where are you living from? And I heard a guy once say, and this is my experience, was 6 and 7. 6 is untreated pretty much, and then 7's when you start treating it, right? So it's like, what am I doing while this stuff shows up? What's my feet doing as this stuff shows up? Am I living in it? Am I feeding it? Am I nourishing it? Am I taking it to God and getting busy with my actions, going to the next person, trying to find someone I can help, right?
And look, the reality is the ultimate awakening is that the answer is both yes and no at all times, right? Like there are character defects in my life, manifestations of selfishness in my life that are big pieces of business for me, that, and why? Because I'm selfish and self-centered, and these are the ones that can blow up my life the most, right? Ego in my relationship or whatever that case may be, right? And so there's character defects that I am very accountable with my sponsor on, that are a huge piece of business for me. And then there's other character defects where it's like, we'll look at that in a couple of years. We'll deal with that one later on. It's not that big of a deal.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank God for transparency, right? Yeah. Thank God. It's when you really look at it like that, which is true. It's like, man, the grace of God saves my ass. Right? It's just saves me. Right? Yeah. I mean, my sponsor and me talk about some of the best qualities of character, the parts of our relationship are of that. The transparency, right? That he shares. I know him on a pretty personal level. I can see that I'm not alone in a lot of this stuff, right? And that because it's real easy. Like if you don't have that transparency, you start beating yourself up with it, right?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Well, I think that there's, I made a joke a minute ago about my sponsor being unimpressed with me, and I think, but it's so true, and I think it's so important, and here's why, right? I think if my sponsor is impressed with all the wonderfulness I do, then I'm going to, whether it's true or not, I'm going to feel that he's going to judge me when I screw up, right?
Nice.
And I have never once gotten off the phone with my sponsor and thought he is impressed with me. But similarly, when I've screwed up, I've never once gotten off the phone with my sponsor and thought, oh, shit, I can't call him anymore.
Nice. Wow. I love that. Yeah. Man, thank you so much, Rory. I think this has been awesome.
Yeah, absolutely, man.
I'd say we schedule some stuff for the beginning of the year. Maybe get through some do some step stuff on here, right?
Yeah, would love to. Just let me know.
Yeah, nice. Well, is there anything else you want to finish it off with?
Hold on. There was again the very brilliant thoughts that I was thinking of on the treadmill that are we're going to change everybody's life aren't coming out. The biggest. I'll share this. This is a fairly vulnerable thing to share, right? And I shared about how my biggest defect in my sobriety has been my sex conduct, right? And I've had a lot of guys come to me who've deeply struggled with that, and I started noticing that was objectionable to me at about 5 years sober, and I wrote inventories on it. I went to other fellowships for a while. I got books on it. I mean everything, right?
Yeah.
And it was like. and it was like trying to hold my breath. I'd be good for a month, maybe 6. It was like trying to not drink, right? It's like I could manage it for a month or maybe a couple of months if I was really trying hard, and then when it exploded, it would explode so much more, right?
Yeah.
And finally, I had an experience with my current sponsor, right? When I brought this to him and I said, I don't know what to do, he didn't say, let's write another inventory or something like that. He asked me some very simple questions, and he said, what time of the day is that stuff most troublesome for you? And I told him, and and he said, okay. I said, why don't you go to a meeting at that time? And then how many guys are you sponsoring? And I think I was sponsoring 7, 8 guys at the time. He said, I bet we could double that number. I bet you could be sponsoring 15, 16 guys. And why don't you have them start calling you, around that time of the day? And why don't you have that time of the day filled with service to other guys, right? Yeah. And ultimately, and Ralph White talks about it, right? I have to be willing to meet God halfway. I can pray on my knees all the live long day, please take away this defect, please take away this defect, but I have to be willing to take the actions of a guy who trusts and believes in this process, even if I don't trust and believe in the process. The same way we tell a newcomer, get to the meeting and we'll make sure you get home, right? I have to take the actions of a guy who trusts and believes in the process, even if I don't trust and believe in the process.
Nice. Wow. That's huge, man. That's awesome. Good stuff. Well, great, man. If you stay on here, and then we'll chat after this for a minute. And yeah, for all the listeners, I appreciate everybody, and I will talk to you all next week. Have a good night.
Hello. Thank you for listening to 3 Legacies Recovery Recordings. If you enjoy our program, please be sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to share with a friend. We're also self-supporting, so feel free to contribute to the channel through Venmo at Recovery Recordings 615. Please note that the views expressed on this podcast are solely our individual views and do not represent any official stance of any 12-step program. We are not affiliated with any specific recovery organization, and this content should not be considered as professional advice for alcoholism or addiction.